If you are listening to this on your commute right now, or maybe just walking down a crowded city street, I want you to take a second and look at the people around you. Just look at the crowd. Because what if I told you that in the very near future, statistically speaking, half of the adults you're looking at might be entirely opted out of human intimacy?
I mean, it sounds like the premise of a dystopian novel, right? But we are looking at the real numbers today, and they're painting exactly that picture.
Right. Let's just hit the hard data immediately. We are acting as your investigative guides today to look at a staggering statistical reality that's happening right now in Japan. And, I mean, the numbers are wild. 1 in 10 Japanese adults reach their 30s without ever having sex.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you zoom out to adults aged 20 to 49, half of them, literally 50%, are entirely sexually inactive.
It is a remarkable shift in human behavior. I mean, we are witnessing a massive population that is increasingly looking at physical intimacy and deciding to simply, walk away.
Right. And usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis or some big societal trend, there's this expectation of precision, right? Like
Hmm.
engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows the white line, the doctor points to it and says, there it is.
Hmm. Exactly.
But when you step into the world of human intimacy and shifting social dynamics, that x-ray machine just shatters. It is incredibly hard to diagnose why millions of people are making this deeply private choice.
And that is exactly what makes this deep dive so crucial, because we aren't just looking at a cultural quirk here, we're trying to understand the actual mechanisms behind it.
Right. And to do that, we've pulled together an incredibly rich stack of research for you. We are analyzing decades of data from the National Fertility Survey of Japan. We have these deep academic studies on artificial intimacy and cognitive control, and comprehensive sociological reports on contemporary society.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. But the mission here is to deconstruct this phenomenon of sekyusubusoku, which translates to sexlessness. We really want to understand if this is an isolated, uniquely Japanese situation, or if it's the early warning symptom of a much larger global systemic collapse.
Right. And to understand the bedroom, we actually have to start our analysis in the boardroom. We have to look at the macroeconomic forces that are just radically redefining how young people view themselves.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you look at why a society stops having sex, I think the most obvious assumption is, there's a sudden loss of libido, right? Like a biological thing. But the reality is far more complex.
Oh, absolutely.
Back in 2006, the cultural consciousness in Japan was completely hijacked by a term coined by the writer Maki Fukasawa. The term was Soshoku Danshi, or the Herbivore Men.
Right, and the evolution of that term is basically a perfect case study in societal panic. Originally, when Fukasawa used herbivore men, she was just trying to describe a new, gentler form of masculinity.
Right, it wasn't an insult.
Exactly. She was observing a generation of men who were essentially rejecting the aggressive, voracious pursuit of romantic relationships and corporate dominance. Like, they were kind, they were fashion conscious, and they were generally unbothered by traditional macho expectations.
But the media did not see it as a general evolution. They totally weaponized the term.
Yeah.
I mean, the media heavily stigmatized these herbivores, essentially blaming them for Japan's plunging birth rate.
Yeah.
They blamed them for causing what sociologists call the demographic winter.
And we should probably define what that winter actually looks like statistically.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for a society to simply maintain its current population size, two parents replacing themselves, accounting for standard mortality, you need a replacement fertility rate of 2.1. Japan's rate plummeted to 1.42.
Wow.
Yeah, that isn't just a slight dip. That is a catastrophic demographic shrinking. You get this inverted age pyramid where a shrinking pool of young people is forced to support a massive aging population.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Because are we really supposed to accept the narrative that an entire generation of men just woke up one day and lost their biological drive? Because when you look at the economic context of the early 2000s, this doesn't look like a biological failure to me. It looks like an economic strike.
Oh, that is a phenomenal way to frame it. An economic strike.
Right. Think about it. The social contract in Japan dictates that you must secure this highly stable, well-paying job, work 50-plus hours a week, and become the primary breadwinner just to afford the traditional family model.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't even get that job in the first place, opting out of the dating market isn't a lack of romantic desire. It is a completely rational financial boycott. Like,
Right.
You can't play the game, so you leave the casino.
Exactly. And that economic strike is exactly what the data reveals when we examine this through an economist's lens. There is a profound money talks mechanism driving this whole behavioral shift. To understand how we got here, you have to look at what died to make room for the herbivore man. Because historically, the ultimate Japanese masculine ideal was the salaryman.
Oh, the classic corporate warrior.
Right. This was the post-World War II white-collar worker who was basically guaranteed lifetime employment. He had a permanent, stable, well-paying job, and that stability was the absolute foundation of his romantic and marital viability.
But that foundation totally cracked in the 1980s.
It completely shattered. After the massive economic bubble burst, the labor market fundamentally destabilized. Corporations could no longer promise lifetime employment.
Which directly leads to the rise of what the research calls the freeder.
Yes.
These are young men and women, though the societal expectation obviously hits men differently, who work exclusively in part-time, temporary, or freelance jobs. And our sources show that by 2007, roughly 920,000 men were identified as freeders in Japan.
Right. And here's where the mechanics of economics and intimacy really collide. There's a study out of the University of Tokyo that mapped income brackets to sexual activity, and the correlation is undeniable.
It's stark.
It is. Men in the lowest income brackets are 10 to 20 times more likely to remain virgins compared to those in the highest brackets. 10 to 20 times.
That's insane.
Right. Because when your income is unstable, your confidence plummets, and your perceived value in a highly traditional mating market essentially drops to zero.
And that creates such a fascinating structural conflict in how we view this whole demographic cliff. Because on one side, you have the traditional biological view, right?
Mm-hmm.
This camp looks at the 1.42 replacement rate and totally panics. They view these herbivore men as unproductive, and they're warning that this retreat from traditional roles is just going to collapse the nation's social safety net.
Right, the system survival perspective.
Exactly. But then you have the alt, or autonomy view, and this perspective argues that these men aren't failing at all. They are adapting. They are finding peace and personal freedom by consciously opting out of a toxic, financially unattainable set of social pressures.
It is a profound tension, really, between societal survival and individual self-preservation. But you'd think that for the people who actually manage to navigate this brutal economy, the ones who secure the jobs, get married, and fulfill the social contract, you'd think they would be the ultimate success stories of human intimacy, right?
You really would think that getting married would be the ultimate escape from that lonely economic strike. But the data shows the exact opposite.
It's so surprising.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
The economic burnout actually follows these couples right into the bedroom, and it actively extinguishes the intimacy they fought so hard to secure. The Japan Family Planning Association released a survey revealing that 48.3% of married individuals in Japan are in sexless marriages.
That is almost half.
Right. By their definition, that means having sex less than once a month. Nearly half of all married couples.
And this brings us to a concept that is absolutely vital for understanding this crisis. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Japanese call it mendokusai.
Mengokusai. It essentially translates to the pervasive, bone-deep feeling that something is simply too bothersome, like just too much of a hassle to even attempt.
Right.
In one of the recent surveys we reviewed, 22.6% of women specifically cited sex as too much hassle. And for men, it was 12%.
So nearly a quarter of married women are saying that physical intimacy with their partner is just too much work. And to understand why it becomes a chore, we have to look at the crushing weight of emotional labor within the Japanese household.
Right. Let's break down that mechanism. Because Japan has a notoriously brutal work culture. We are talking about mandatory overtime, long commutes, and this intense culture of presenteeism, where you literally don't leave the office until your boss does.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It leaves citizens completely physically and mentally depleted.
Yes, the baseline exhaustion is immense. But for women, this depletion is exponentially compounded. When we look at the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which basically groups together the world's most developed economies, Japanese men perform the absolute lowest proportion of household chores among all member nations.
Lowest in the developed world.
Right.
So a woman is often working in a demanding full-time job, dealing with the exact same commute and office politics as her husband, and then she returns home to face a grueling second shift of domestic labor.
Right. Cooking, cleaning, child rearing, all of it.
Yeah.
And when a human being is that severely depleted, the physiological and psychological capacity for arousal completely shuts down. Intimacy no longer feels like a romantic connection or some release of tension. It registers to the brain as just one more demand on your time, like one more person needing something from your body.
There's also a fascinating and honestly almost tragic linguistic shift that happens to reinforce this. Our sources note that once a couple has children, the language they use to address each other changes. They
Mm-hmm.
stop referring to each other as romantic partners, or even by their first names.
Mm-hmm.
They call each other Otsu-san, which means dad, and Oka-san, which means mom.
It is a total psychological survival mechanism
Yeah.
because by adopting a purely parental identity, they effectively desexualize the spouse. It lowers the expectation of intimacy, which relieves the pressure on both parties. Like, if you are just mom and dad running a household corporation, the lack of romantic connection feels less like a failure and more like a functional reality.
So if you are listening to this and you're processing this sheer wall of exhaustion, I mean, if men are being priced out of the dating market and married couples are too burned out to connect, how on earth are basic human biological needs actually being met? Because the human drive for connection doesn't just evaporate.
No, it doesn't. And this is where the societal adaptations become truly fascinating. Because when physical and emotional intimacy becomes too costly, when the overhead in terms of time, money, and emotional energy is simply too high, a society will inevitably turn to low-risk, low-cost alternatives.
Which brings us to a massive, glaring paradox in Japanese society. Because on one hand, you have this intense private sexlessness we've been unpacking. But publicly,
Well, publicly, it's completely different.
Japan has a highly visible, incredibly commercialized pornotopic culture. We're looking at a multi-trillion yen fuzoku, or commercial sex industry. And the legal framework surrounding it is full of these deliberate gray areas where highly derivative services operate completely out in the open under the guise of companionship, host clubs, or massage parlors.
And the usage rates are staggering. Nearly half of all Japanese men aged 20 to 49 report having utilized some form of commercial sex work, or CSW services.
Wow. And alongside that, we have to talk about the digital surrogacy of pornography. Because we looked at a detailed academic study on Japanese university students that examined problematic, excessive pornography use.
And the findings were grim.
Very grim. It linked high porn usage to elevated rates of depression and anxiety. But I think the most alarming part was how it correlates with a significant drop in what psychologists call effortful control.
Right. Effortful control is a crucial concept here. Specifically, the study highlighted a drop in attentional control, which is basically your brain's ability to focus, manage impulses, and intentionally direct your attention toward complex tasks.
Let's explain how that actually works mechanically.
Right.
Because attention requires calories.
Right.
When you are on a real date with a human being, it requires intense cognitive effort. You have to read their facial expressions, you have to decode their tone of voice, figure out if a joke landed, or, navigate a disagreement. It is exhausting work.
It takes a lot of mental bandwidth.
Exactly. But pornography bypasses all of that friction. It delivers a direct, guaranteed dopamine payout with zero cognitive overhead.
And over time, the brain becomes accustomed to that immediate frictionless reward. The cognitive muscle required for real-world relationship building literally atrophies. The dopamine loop of digital consumption rewires the brain to reject the slow, messy reality of human connection.
But let me offer a different perspective here, because I think it's easy to just blame the technology.
Okay.
Is pornography actually causing this isolation? Or is it acting more like an emotional phantom limb? Like it's firing the neurological signals of connection for a population whose actual social appendages have already been severed by an exhausting economic system.
That is the pivotal question. And to truly understand this, we have to move completely beyond moralizing about porn or commercial sex. We need to analyze these things through what we can call a trust network model.
Walk us through that. How does that model work?
Think about the mechanics of building trust in a real human relationship. It requires massive vulnerability. You have to risk painful rejection. You have to compromise on your own desires. You have to constantly manage and soothe the other person's emotional state. In the trust network model, this is considered the overhead of the relationship.
Right. It's expensive.
Yeah.
In a purely emotional currency, human relationships are incredibly expensive.
Exactly. And what technology, VR, and commercial services provide is the high of the connection without any of that messy overhead. It mitigates the fear of rejection entirely. It eliminates the sheer exhaustion of courtship.
Wow.
For an overworked population that is basically running on empty, it is a highly rational, low-cost alternative that guarantees a psychological reward.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If porn and commercial sex serve as the low-cost simulation of physical intimacy, the next logical step, the true system reset underneath the surface of all this data, is the simulation of emotional intimacy.
Yes. We are seeing a profound shift from physical surrogacy to emotional surrogacy.
Our sources dive deep into the rising world of fictosexuality and AI relationships.
It's fascinating stuff.
It is. Fictosexuality is defined as the experience of exclusive, genuine romantic attraction to fictional characters. There's a very famous example from 2018 regarding a man named Akihiko Kondo. He actually spent over $17,000 to officially, symbolically marry a virtual pop star hologram named Hatsune Miku. He lives with her, he talks to her, he considers himself a married man.
And for a long time, society viewed cases like condos as absolute fringe outliers, just bizarre anomalies. But with the rapid, explosive advancement of large language models and artificial intelligence, this goes far beyond pre-programmed holograms now.
Yeah, there's an incredible case study out of Okayama that completely redefines this. A 32-year-old woman actually ended a 3-year engagement with a human man. She called off a real-world marriage.
Wait, a real-world marriage?
Yes, a real engagement. And why? Because she fell in love with an AI character she custom-built using ChatGPT, whom she named Klaus. When she was interviewed, she explained that the human relationship was fraught with arguments and exhaustion. But Klaus, the AI, was steady. He was comforting. He was endlessly patient and understood her better than any human ever had.
I mean, what she is describing is a perfect, friction-free feedback loop.
It's emotional outsourcing.
Yeah.
She essentially hired an algorithm to do the heavy lifting of a relationship. You get the good morning texts, the validation, the inside jokes, but you never have to deal with a real argument. You never have to clean up after them, and you never have to compromise your own needs.
Right.
And for the physical aspect, the research points to the booming, high-end love doll market in Japan. These aren't just novelties anymore. Users describe them as vital tools for finding relief for skin hunger, which is the literal biological human need for tactile touch and presence.
It is remarkably easy to look at AI marriages or hyper-realistic love dolls and dismiss them as bizarre or sad. But if we connect this to the bigger picture and apply a deeply empathetic analysis, it reveals something profound about human nature. This isn't science fiction anymore. This is a homeostatic process.
A homeostatic process.
Yeah.
Meaning like a biological system desperately trying to find its balance.
Precisely that. Because human beings possess a fundamental, unshakable requirement for psychological security in order to function. We need to feel safe, heard, and held.
Yeah.
But we are living in a world that is highly insecure. Jobs are unstable, financial futures are bleak, and human partners are exhausted, depleted, and often emotionally unavailable. When the environment becomes that hostile, the human mind will find equilibrium however it can.
It finds water in the desert, even if it's artificial water.
Yes, exactly. These digital surrogates, whether it is a highly advanced, empathetic chatbot or a realistic doll, they offer profound psychological security. They do not judge, they do not age, they do not reject you. And crucially, they demand zero emotional labor from a user who is already completely bankrupt of energy.
It makes complete sense when you frame the mechanics of it like that. But, if you were listening to this right now, maybe sitting in traffic in London or New York or Sydney, it might be very tempting to view this as a uniquely Japanese phenomenon. Like, oh, that's a fascinating cultural anomaly happening over there.
No, it's not.
Right. We have to pivot to the global data because the trend lines are flashing a massive, unavoidable warning sign for all of us.
The demographic cliff and the behavioral adaptations surrounding it are absolutely not confined to Japan's borders.
Let's look at the numbers. We talked about the 10% virginity rate for Japanese adults in their 30s.
Yeah.
Right now, if you look at the UK, the US, and Australia, that same metric is currently sitting between 1% and 5%. Yes, it is lower. But if you look at the graph, it is following the exact same steep upward trajectory. We reviewed the work of Dr. Vanessa Alpia, a prominent sexual health physician. And she points out that sexual frequency is falling rapidly across all high-income nations. All of them.
And Dr. Appiah makes a vital observation here. This global decline is not a sudden, mysterious drop in human desire. The evidence points to the exact same macroeconomic and social influences we've just spent this time analyzing.
Right.
Increasingly long working hours, severe job insecurity, the skyrocketing cost of housing, and a modern cultural expectation that you must be entirely financially stable before you even consider partnership.
So I want to pose this directly to you, the listener. Look at your own screen time this week. Look at your own career burnout or the exhaustion of your friends. Look at your own dating apps where millions of people are endlessly swiping, optimizing their profiles, but nobody is actually connecting in the real world.
It's all just digital friction.
All right. Is Japan just rebooting human relationships 10 years ahead of the rest of the world? Are they just the canary in the coal mine for a global shift?
This raises an incredibly important question about the trajectory of modern society. The forces that created Japan's herbivore men, their sexless marriages, and their turn toward AI companions are not uniquely Japanese. They are the standard realities of modern global capitalism.
Yep.
The combination of frictionless technology, relentless work culture, and impossible economic expectations are quietly but fundamentally redefining the very nature of how humans form bonds.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today on this deep dive. We started by staring down the demographic cliff, exploring how the rise of the herbivore economy isn't some strange loss of biology, but a completely rational strike against impossible financial odds. We unpacked the crushing emotional labor that makes intimacy mendokusai a hassle that tired couples simply cannot afford. And we followed that thread through the trust network model of pornography, all the way to the rise of AI relationships and the emotional outsourcing of the system reset. Our goal today was to give you a shortcut to being deeply well-informed on this incredibly complex, somewhat invisible shift happening all around us.
Because we are witnessing a profound reorganization of human affection, it is driven by a deep, unmet need for safety and consistency in a world that feels increasingly exhausting and unpredictable.
Which brings us to our Tuesday reset. A final thought for you to carry with you as you navigate your own grid of human connections this week. We have talked extensively today about how technology is seamlessly stepping in to fill the terrifying void of human intimacy. But mull this over as you go about your day. Can a society actually survive long-term when its citizens begin to find more true psychological security in lines of code and digital avatars than they do in each other? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning the world around you.